Salud was a great supervisor. He is now an extraordinary congressman, and he will always be our unflappable friend. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to our unflappable friend, Congressman Salud Carbajal.
As a freshman trying to find my way, trying to look at how I could be more effective, it's individuals like Adam who lend their wisdom and advice and expertise to people like myself so I could better represent you, and I'm very grateful to Adam Schiff for his wonderful wisdom. Thank you. He's been a champion for job creation, for protecting the environment, for human rights, and an expert on our national security. He was a former prosecutor, a former state legislator, and now serves on the Appropriations Committee, where he has taken a leave from to serve on the Select Intelligence Committee, where many of you have seen him on TV talking about his work. He is deliberate, he is smart, he is a rock star, and he's our Democrat rock star. Let's put your hands together for Adam Schiff.
Well, I have to start out by telling you how horribly sorry I am for being so late. I want you to know I was not trying to do my best Bill Clinton impersonation. I just came from the Pride Parade in Los Angeles. I represent Hollywood and West Hollywood. And we had a phenomenal parade, but it ran phenomenally long. So my apologies, but how wonderful to be with you and how wonderful to be here for Salud. You're still a freshman? Is that possible? I tell you, you have a great representative here. It is such a pleasure to serve with him. When I want someone, when we're in these tough fights, I go for the former Marines. That's who I want in the foxhole with me. But Salud does a fabulous job representing this district, but also protecting our coastline. As a member of the Armed Service Committee, protecting our country. As a member of the Budget Committee, protecting our fiscal health and our future and our kids' future. He is a fabulous champion, and when he asked me to come up here, I told him I would be delighted, even though it was Carpinteria or Santa Barbara. I mean, if it was Bakersfield, I would have been excited, but I'm really just so thrilled to be here, Salud, and so grateful for your great service. Thank you for sending Salud to us. Thank you for sending him back to us, because we need to flip the House, and we can't do that unless we make sure that all of our representatives stay in the Congress, particularly those that represent very difficult districts. When I first ran for Congress, I ran against a Republican incumbent. People like Deborah Dentler and others who are here helped me challenge that incumbent, and I know that really there are two kinds of jobs in Congress, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, and very different responsibilities. Salud blue and representing our here. This is, I don't need to say, the most dangerous and often absurd of times. And just to give you an illustration of how dangerous and absurd it is, about 2 months ago, one of our colleagues approached me on the House floor and asked me what I thought of Michael Bolton being National Security Advisor. And I said, well, I think you mean John Bolton. Michael Bolton is a singer. But actually, I'd be perfectly okay with Michael Bolton as a National Security Advisor. I would sleep better if Michael Bolton was our National Security Advisor. And you know the absurd thing about it? It's true. It's true. I mean, here we are today. We're in a fight with the Canadians. You know, thank God we finally have a president who will stand up to those Canadians. You know, okay, yeah, they fought beside us in just about every war, and they were with us when we were attacked on 9/11. They're one of our closest friends and allies, but you know, then again, there's their hockey and their maple syrup, and their about this and about that. You know, it's the time we took on those Canadians. So we've now alienated Canada, Britain, Germany, France, almost all of the southern hemisphere, all of Africa, but we can take solace in the fact that we have embraced Russia and maybe North Korea, but this is where we are, where it is a liability to be an ally of the United States. Allies are turned into enemies. It is the most disruptive period that we've gone through in a generation. And I'll tell you one of the things that became so horribly apparent to me during the course of the last year and a half of working on the Russia investigation. And it's the realization that the threat posed to the United States, the threat posed to our country from without, the threat posed to our democracy from without, from Russia and elsewhere, is less than the threat posed to our democracy now from within. For the first time, we have a President of the United States who attacks our own free press, who has described the free press as the enemy of the people. Now, in the blizzard of everything going on, this might have escaped your notice, but this is part of the challenge of dealing with this presidency in which so much is going wrong so many times a day. The things that ought to be of great significance to us and concern get completely obliterated by everything else going on. But just within the last 2 weeks, we learned that the president was having secret meetings with the Postmaster General to browbeat her into raising postal rates on Amazon. And why? To punish Jeff Bezos and the Washington Post. So we're going to punish the Washington Post. We're going to punish CNN by holding up a merger involving its parent. We're going to reward Sinclair Broadcasting because the president likes their programming. We're going to talk about pulling NBC's license because he doesn't like what they have to say. We're going to strip credentials away from White House press correspondents who don't write things favorable to the president. That's not what we do in America. That's what tin pot dictators do. That is not what we do. And sadly, while we have been a champion of free press around the world, now we see despots around the world imitating our president. You see Bashar al-Assad talking about fake news. You see Duterte in the Philippines castigating CNN International. You see Erdogan in Turkey. Turkey is now the leading jailer of journalists in the world. And of course, the president's assault on our free press is only one assault on one of our institutions. We see daily the attacks on the independence of our Justice Department. We see the denigration of judges based on their ethnic origin. We see the battering down of our system of checks and balances each and every day. And in the midst of all of this, what do we hear from my Republican colleagues? Not a word. Not a word. And this to me was the other terrible realization of the last year and a half, which was not what a terrible president Donald Trump would turn out to be. That was sadly all too predictable. But just how complicit our colleagues in the Congress would be, just how silent they would be in the face of this attack on our institutions, on our very democracy. And all too often when our House colleagues have had anything to say, it has been to support the president's attack on these same institutions. So this is a very hazardous time for our democracy. I can't think of a midterm in my lifetime that had as much significance as this one, and I know those of you that have been active politically for a long time, you hear politicians say that all the time. This time, it's inarguably true. There is no more important midterm than the one we are about to have. And the stakes could not be greater. We have the opportunity to flip the House and, for the first time since this president took office, provide some oversight of what damage this administration is doing. To be able to look into the corruption, large and small, that we see on almost a daily basis. One of the other things we learned just in the last 2 weeks, but again got lost in the blizzard of everything else going on, is that the Treasury Secretary of the United States sanctioned a Chinese telecom giant called ZTE. And we sanctioned ZTE because we found that ZTE had been cheating on the sanctions involving Iran and North Korea, and then lying to us about it. And we also sanctioned them because our intelligence agencies said that ZTE was an espionage threat to Americans. Well, the president rather abruptly and inexplicably changed course on ZTE 2 weeks ago with a tweet, because that's how everything is done now, with a tweet. And what did this tweet say? What was the justification given for this about face? because it was costing China too many jobs. What the hell does that mean? Now, why did the president reverse course on ZTE? Well, there are a lot of explanations, possible explanations. The first is, he's the worst negotiator in the world. He may be good at self-promotion, but he is the worst negotiator in the world. We haven't even entered into the negotiations with China, and he's already conceded something China wanted very badly. That makes no sense whatsoever. So if that possibility makes no sense, then what are the other possibilities? Well, it's also possible that he is so desperate for a deal with North Korea that he's willing to give China anything. Now, this is a problem, not just with respect to China, but it's a problem if the North Koreans believe that we are so desperate for a deal, we will do anything for it. And here's where the president compounded the problem by reneging on the Iran nuclear deal. Now, whether you like the Iran nuclear deal or you didn't, it made no sense whatsoever to walk out of that deal, and it made even less sense to do so before you had a deal with North Korea. That made it more difficult to get to a deal with North Korea, but beyond that, you kindle a problem, a nuclear problem with one country before you solve the nuclear problem with another. This only further told Kim Jong-un how desperate he would be to get a deal with North Korea. So it's possible this reversal on ZTE was because he's desperate for a deal and for China's help with North Korea. But there's a third possibility. And the third possibility is the very same week that Donald Trump announced he was changing course on this threat to our national security, this company that was cheating on sanctions, that our intelligence agencies consider an espionage threat. We learned the same week he reversed course, China had decided to invest $500 million in a Trump-branded property in Indonesia. Now, can you imagine if that had happened during the Obama administration? What kind of an outcry there would be? What kind of call for investigations there would be? The Benghazi investigation took 2.5 years and encountered nothing except that a terrible tragedy had taken place. But we don't know what this reversal was about, and the fact is, under this Congress, with this majority, we're never going to find out. Because the GOP in Congress simply doesn't care. They don't care. They don't want to know. Throughout the course of the Russia investigation, the most common refrain from the Republicans and everything they did in our committee is, we don't want to know. Well, that is no way to defend our institutions. That's no way to defend our country. And for my GOP colleagues who are remaining mute as we alienate our allies and we befriend our enemies and we tear down these institutions one at a time, they are going to go down in history as the worst majority in record. They are going to have a lot of explaining to do to posterity about why they remain silent and complicit when our democracy was at risk. So I want to thank you for coming out to support Salud. And making sure that he comes back to Congress is a key part of flipping the House. But I also want to tell you why I'm optimistic. And I know that with everything going on with the efforts to walk out of the climate accord and with everything Scott Pruitt does from the moment he wakes up until the moment he goes to sleep, with a State Department that is now a shadow of its former self, it can be overwhelming when you see all that's going on. It can be overwhelming. Don't try to do everything. Just try to do one thing. Just make a decision that between now and November, I am going to do something to change the direction of this country. Now, your being here is a great part of that effort. But the country really needs all of us right now, in our public capacity, our private capacity, our corporate capacity, our civic capacity. The country really needs all of us. And the good news is, from coast to coast, there is a level of engagement and activism like nothing we've ever seen. In election after election, in these off-term elections, we see a dramatic sweep of 5, 10, 15, 20, 25% swing from where the voters were in 2016 to where they are today. So we have a great opportunity to take back the House. And if the wave is big enough, we might take back the Senate as well. And then we get back in the business of oversight. We put the brakes on the damage this administration can do for as long as we are forced to suffer Donald Trump as this president. So there's every reason for optimism. And the last thing I'll say, because this is something I think about through the darkest times, and that is something Bill Clinton once said. There's nothing wrong in America that can't be cured by what's right in America. There is an awful lot right in America. And you are part of what's right in America, and I thank you so much for your support. Thank you very much.
Congressman, what is the most effective thing that you believe we can do as citizens right now to reverse this?
The question is, what is the most effective thing that people can do to reverse what's going on? And, you know, I think really the cross-cutting action of all right now is to make sure the House, one House or the other, ideally both, are in Democratic hands. Because whether you care about the environment or human rights or any other issue right now, our ability to protect the values that we cherish will depend almost completely on whether we can flip one of the houses. So that, I think, is the most effective thing. But I'll say also, there are any number of great organizations right now, many of whom have sprung into existence in the last year, that are a great way to channel your energies. And so if you care passionately about the fact that our Justice Department right now, instead of intervening to protect minority voting rights, is intervening on the side of those to disenfranchise minority voters, there's a way to get involved in that issue. And if you care most about these persistent efforts to drill off our coast, there's a way to get involved in that issue. And many of these organizations are kind of a twofer. You can work on the environment and you can work on getting rid of the dirty dozen in Congress. I sat next to a woman on the plane the other day flying back to DC. She introduced herself and she said, "I am part of an 11,000 woman strong group. We call ourselves Law Mamas. We are lawyers, we are mothers, and we're pissed. And we're going to do something about it. I believe they will." There are any number of groups like that are a great venue to get involved and make a difference. And so I would just encourage you to continue to direct your efforts toward the midterms. You know, in years past, we used to rent vans, and we would bus people to Nevada, and we bus people to Arizona, and we bus people to New Mexico to walk precincts and make calls. We get all the House seats we need to win right here without having to go out of state. So there are any number of races to get involved in and districts to help in, and thank you very much for the question.
Anthony Serby, the last one.
Yeah, I'm curious about. Okay, we should make this brief. You've been so articulate as the minority leader on the Intelligence Committee, but what's actually going on inside there? I mean, why do we seem to be so helpless? Why are you thwarted at every step?
Yeah.
And what is the inside thing on that? I mean,
Yeah. Anthony's question is, in the Intelligence Committee, you know, why are you thwarted at every step by what the majority is doing? And, you know, and basically, where is this all leading? And that's a great question. You know, the reason why we were thwarted on the Intelligence Committee, the reason why the Republicans threw out when we would have witnesses come in and they would make bogus claims of privilege, or they'd simply refuse to answer questions. And we urged that the witnesses be subpoenaed and the witnesses be compelled, and the Republicans refused, is that they're in the majority. And they can do whatever they wish. And to show you just how absolute power can corrupt, we see every day the most arbitrary and ridiculous and terrible exercises of power by the Republican majority. So in our committee, the Republicans have walked away from the one investigation they were charged with doing, and that is what Russia did and what help they got from U.S. persons, particularly in the Trump campaign. But they have intensified their effort to attack the Justice Department, to attack Bob Mueller. to demand documents that they hope to give to the legal defense team for Donald Trump. Why did they do this? Why can they do this? Why can't we stop them from doing this? Because they control the gavel. Take the gavel from them, and it's a completely different story. Now let me just talk for a moment, because I'm sure you're interested in where is this headed. What risk is Bob Mueller under, and what's likely to happen down the road? First of all, as a fellow Marine, Bob Mueller is one tough son of a bitch. And he's smart, and he's hardworking, he has incredible integrity. I worked with him for many years when he was the director of the FBI, and I think he is doing everything right. I also think that we are likely to see another indictment. The last indictment of the 13 Russians charged a conspiracy to defraud the United States by a surreptitious social media campaign in which the Russians were advertising and providing organic content and trying to divide Americans and trying to help Trump and hurt Hillary Clinton. That was one aspect of the conspiracy. But there was another aspect of the conspiracy that was completely omitted from that indictment. And that was the Russian effort to hack into the democratic institutions and leak these documents throughout, to put the Clinton campaign on the constant defensive throughout. And so as a former prosecutor, I asked myself, why was that left out of the indictment? And I could tell you it's not for lack of evidence. We developed the evidence on the hacking and dumping operation by the Russians well before we knew the contours of what they were doing on social media. You would leave that out of the indictment only, I believe, if that part of the indictment either involved U.S. persons or you hadn't concluded yet whether to include U.S. persons. But that indictment, I believe, is coming. And the question will it be another 13 Russians, or will it be Russians and people associated with the Trump campaign as well? Now, on the issue of obstruction of justice, I would imagine that Bob Mueller is going to submit a report to the Justice Department on his findings. I don't think there is any constitutional bar to indicting a sitting president. Some people point to an Office of Legal Counsel opinion saying you can't do that. Well, it's clear the administration doesn't pay attention to opinions of Office of Legal Counsel, because there's another opinion of Office of Legal Counsel that says you can't pardon yourself. And clearly they don't believe that is binding. But I do think that Bob Mueller is likely to conclude that for prudential reasons, it wouldn't make sense for him to indict a sitting president, even if the evidence rose to that level, but rather to provide that evidence to the Justice Department for consideration as to whether impeachment is warranted. Now, here's where Rod Rosenstein comes in. Rod Rosenstein has two very important responsibilities, I think, that are dimly understood. People understand what Bob Mueller's job is. They don't really understand what Rod Rosenstein's job is. The two key decisions Rod Rosenstein makes are, what is the scope of the Bob Mueller investigation? What will Bob Mueller be allowed to investigate? And that is very important, because one of the things that I think Bob Mueller needs to investigate is whether the Russians were laundering money through the Trump organization. That would be a very powerful lever the president would, the Russians would have over the President of the United States. But Rod Rosenstein will also be the recipient of that report from Bob Mueller. And Rod Rosenstein will make the decision whether that report gets presented to the Congress, or that report gets presented to the public, or that report never sees the light of day, which makes him a very important person. And I have to think that at a minimum it will be presented to Congress, but I would like to see it presented to the public. I think the public has a right to know. I think the public has a need to know. And so that is what I would expect. And I can't give you any indication of timing, but I do think that the president's defense team has decided they're better off, after initially wanting to rush the investigation, they're now better off delaying it as much as they can, stringing out the debate over whether the president will be submitted for an interview, because if they can push all this beyond the election, then they can increase the drumbeat that we should bring the Mueller investigation to an end. So I think that's what Giuliani is doing. But watching Rudy Giuliani just, just makes you wonder why so many people are willing to completely debase themselves for a seat at Donald Trump's table. I just can't fathom it. But that's what I think we're looking for from Bob Mueller.
I know you only have two, but does Rob Rosenstein
Say that again. You're going to be the last one. And that's because he said he was willing to take one more.
Does Rod Rosenstein doing the letter saying why they fired Comey, does that complicate him being able to stay there?
The question is, does the fact that Rod Rosenstein wrote the memo justifying or serving as a pretext for the firing of James Comey
So he's a witness.
complicate his position as a potential witness? It does complicate it. Now, I think that those that are raising this issue among the GOP in Congress right now are raising a genuine issue for a illegitimate reason, which is they simply want to give the president grounds to get rid of him. And the Justice Department has apparently opined on whether this is a conflict, an irreconcilable conflict, and decided it isn't. And what Rod Rosenstein has said publicly is that if Bob Mueller reaches the point where he thinks there's a conflict, that he will take whatever step is appropriate. But I am as concerned about Rod Rosenstein being fired or forced out as I am Bob Mueller. Because if you get rid of Rod Rosenstein, you can cripple the Mueller investigation in a way that is far less visible to the public. And the final thing that I am concerned about is the degree to which the president is numbing us to the abuse of the pardon power. It began with the pardon of Joe Arpaio, something that was announced at a political rally to a fellow traveler in the birther conspiracy theories. It was a message to the Mike Flynn's and the Paul Manaforts and all the others. I won't even wait until the criminal case is finished before I will pardon people who stick with me. The pardon of Scooter Libby, who was convicted of obstruction of justice and lying, does that sound familiar? Was also a message. The pardon of D'Souza, the conservative activist, who admitted to hiding contributions in excess of the legal limits, sounds a lot like Michael Cohen and the payments to Stormy Daniels. This is another message. And even the pardons that I think would enjoy a lot of public support, like Alice Johnson, these are meant by the president as a demonstration of his unfettered ability to give pardons to anyone. He views himself as king. And while I can call for the death penalty to drug dealers and I can be a terrible king, I can also be a magnanimous king and see me give a pardon to this person convicted of drug trafficking. So we can look forward to more abuse of the pardon power, more arbitrary use of the pardon power as a way of numbing us to what he might do to essentially remove the incentive for people who might testify against him. So
calling a traitor a traitor.
I'm going to hand back the mic back to Salud. But once again, I thank you so much for inviting. Great pleasure to join you.
And if I want to go home today, I want to recognize my wife, Gina, who is here. Raise your hand, sweetheart.